So when you start looking at varieties, you're getting serious about your production system. You don't just go and buy an unnamed corn hybrid. You are going after specific traits, things that you want on your farm.
Once you've decided to add a small grains crop to your operation, which one should you grow? What fits best for you? Oats, wheat, barley, rye? There are pros and cons to each crop.
Look at what you want the small grains to do, and they can do a lot for you because of their rotational value. In the rotation, where if you have, corn and soybeans and then small grains like oats, wheat, or barley, or any, whatever, triticale, rye, winter barley, you got that as a third crop.
We've been growing small grain, specifically wheat. I think we planted the first wheat crop in the fall of 2009, I believe. We're, I guess, about 2.5 hours from a market, and that's probably the main reason that we started with wheat.
There's a number of reasons that we thought about small grains this year, and we picked spring wheat. Timing-wise, that seemed to work best for us. We didn't have time for a winter annual small grain last fall. We weren't able to get one in, so we went with spring wheat this year.
So I've tried a lot of different things. Triticale and oats and barley and wheat, both winter and spring. Triticale, at this point, fall triticale seems to be my best bet because I have a market for that, for seed, with Albert Lee Seed House. So if I can get that to plant it on time after the soybeans and get it to survive the winter, that's usually my best bet.
Well, oats have always been the small grain of choice in this area. The main thing that we use the oats for is for feed. It's added to our feed ration for the calves and primarily sows and then the dairy cows.
We did do oats to have the cover crop or have the nurse crop for the alfalfa, and I just tried spring barley because it was a higher value crop than oats. I didn't know what it would yield, but I had a hard time making 80 bushel oats. We never did get the 100 bushel oats like some of the neighbors. Didn't have the magic for that.
Well, over the years we've grown barley, wheat, and oats. Oats seems to work the best year after year because there'll be a lot of rust problems with the wheat, and we've had some trouble with barley heads breaking off. So we'll probably grow mostly oats in the future, and but we've grown all three.
After choosing a small grain, you have to figure out where it goes, what field to grow it on, where it fits in your rotation. One of the most important things to look for when considering a field for planting small grains is that small grains are a little bit more susceptible to herbicide damage than corn and soybeans.
One of the first things we looked at in growing a small grain was our herbicide residuals from herbicides we had used before in our corn and soybean crops, because a number of those herbicides have very long carryover or long planting window before you can plant a small grain or a different crop. And so we started by looking at those herbicides that we had used to see the possibility of what small grains crops we might be able to plant given the herbicide history of the field that we're on.
Matt Liebman of Iowa State University presented on his Marsden Farm experiment at the Small Grains Short Course held by Practical Farmers of Iowa last year. And he talked a little bit about how herbicide residual can damage small grains crops.
Roundup is very benevolent with regard to what you seed after it. Doesn't have soil residual activity. As people are becoming more concerned about glyphosate resistance in weeds, they're beginning to tank mix glyphosate with other products, or they're using other products in place of glyphosate. Some of those materials have long residual times that do not work well for oat or forage legume production. So I'm not singling out these as any kind of bad actors. I'm just calling your attention to the fact that whatever chemical practices you may be following with your oats and your forage legumes, you need to look at the label for the rotation restriction, the plant back time. Some of these have fairly long plant back times. And whether they're immediately toxic to oats or not, I can't tell you, but I think the potential is there, particularly if you don't have a lot of rainfall. So if you're coming out of soybean and it's been relatively dry and you've had relatively poor conditions for herbicide degradation, you could be getting into some residual issues here, okay? So just a word to the wise, look at the labels. Know what you're dealing with before you start putting a lot of effort into small grains. Make sure your previous weed control practices are compatible with that.
And with oats, many farmers look to plant into soybean stubble.
No-tilling oats into soybean stubble for beginner is just would be so wonderful and so easy. It just works really well.
We do a couple of different rotations. This field is part of a 3-year rotation of corn, soybeans, oats with an underseeding of clover that you might see coming through here. And again, that fits in very, very well into our fertility plans, our pest control issues, our weed control issues. It all works together in one big system.
Oats, that we used to raise was always as a nurse crop with a hay seeding underneath. We've continued to use that practice.
We do it the old-fashioned way. We plant that in the spring, let's say, and the old-fashioned way is to sow your grass seed or alfalfa or red clover or whatever, whether it's a cover crop, plow down, adding organic matter, or whether it's for hay the next year or next 2 or even 3 years, we just plant that all in the spring.
We grow spring barley in the 4-year rotation of small grain going to alfalfa that produces the N for the corn, back to soybeans, and then to the small grain again. That's our rotation.
Just grow fall triticale. It fits in my rotation. It's no-till drilled following the soybeans as soon as I can get it in the fall. And then I overseed it with red clover in the spring, and had really good luck with that. I get 80 to 100 pounds of nitrogen from the red clover, and then that's for the corn the following year then. So it's a 3-year rotation.
Well, we've been to this is the 3rd year now I've been putting 100% rye on everything, but the acres that I harvest for seed, we usually combine that sometime in July, and then I kind of strategically place them acres, so if I got some dirt work or waterways I want to do some shaping, I'll put it by them, and then I can go out there in the summertime and do my waterway work. And we had a field over at the other farm that we did some pattern tiling on this year, and it's a nice time of the year to do that. It's easier to get contractors in the summer than it is in the spring and the fall when they're busy, and it works good for that. If if you're short on manure storage, you need a place to haul some manure in the summer. It's a good place to do that. It's just kind of versatile. You can kind of just back to thinking ahead what you want to do, and then kind of work it into the rotation.
After deciding which small grain to grow, it's time to pick a variety. David Weisberger is a graduate student and has been researching oats in the state of Iowa over the last few years. He says that the most important thing to look for when selecting an oat variety is the end use of the crop.
When you're selecting a small grain, you want to think of lots of different things, and the first thing that you really want to think is, what is the market for this small grain? So when you look at a variety trial, and let's say you're the type of grower that wants to grow a food grade crop potentially, what you need to look at in that variety trial is not just yield and standability, but you really need to be looking at that test weight ranking, right? So in order to sell a food grade crop, millers want a test weight of 36 pounds or better. So when you're looking at a variety trial, you really want to look at those heaviest test weight oats and select a variety based on that. Another thing to think about is, as you go further south, the probability of having heat and moisture sooner in the season is really high. So if you're further south in Iowa, maybe you want to look at planting an earlier season oat. Maybe that's something you should think about. If you're on the northern, in the northernmost part of Iowa, and it's going to stay cooler longer into the season, then maybe you can look at a fuller season oat. And there's a greater potential to have that high test weight. So again, you want to think about the market you're selling oats to, right? Your end user, and you want to select a variety based on that.
Practical Farmers of Iowa has been working with Iowa State University to conduct variety trials on oats in northern Iowa for the last couple years. These trials examined a number of different oat varieties from the upper Midwest, varieties developed by university researchers in Wisconsin, Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Illinois. Some of the things that these variety trials look at are disease resistance, standability, yield, test weight, and other variables.
So we planted 5 different varieties of oats on our farm this year. The first 12-acre field that we planted this spring, we knew that we wanted to not only raise oats there this year, but we wanted to establish a stand of forage that we could continue raising and harvesting in the years that follow. So we looked for an oat variety that would be noted for being a good companion or nurse crop to a forage crop. We found that characteristic in one hybrid of oats called Sabre. We planted Sabre oats on that field. We underseeded it with some alfalfa and some fescue and some orchard grass. On the other field, we split that up amongst 4 other varieties of oats. We had some Shelby 427s, we had some Hayden oats, we had some Natty oats, which are very similar to Shelby 427, and then we had some Dion oats. All of those oats, starting with the Sabre, were different maturities. So like the Sabre was considered an early season variety, and then as we got into some of the other varieties, we went into mid-season varieties and then into some later season oats like the Dion. And that allowed us to spread our oat harvest out over about 3 weeks' time. So it made really good use of the resources that we had for harvesting equipment, and it would give us the time we knew that we would need to not only swath and harvest the grain, but also bale and harvest the straw. One thing we had learned in 2015, growing a large number of oats for the first time, is that harvesting and dealing with the production output from a field of oats is far different than dealing with similar production you would get off of the same number of acres from a corn field or a soybean field. You're able to harvest and process those grains much more quickly per acre than you are with a crop like oats. So we knew we needed to spread out our varieties so that we would have a wide enough window of time to allow us to manage that, and that seemed to work out pretty good this year.
Variety selection is a big thing when it comes to that as well, and there's a couple varieties of oats that seem to work well for our systems. Dion oats is what we're harvesting right now, and then also Spurs oats seem to be a good mix for the fertility programs that we use. And Spurs are a little earlier crop, I believe, a little earlier variety, and a little shorter. Dion can be a little taller, a little longer season. We're not seeing it this year. I wouldn't consider my oats very tall this year, but they can get taller, the Dion ones can.
This year we planted Shelby 427 oats. They've got pretty good test weight, and we were trying for the food market. So I wish they would stand a little bit better, but with the test weight factor, that's kind of the major thing we look at.
Perhaps even more important to watch for than specific varieties, as those varieties are always changing every few years, are the performance characteristics that the varieties have.
For us, I wanted a large seeded rye variety that was going to give me good grain yield, more uniform emergence, and more uniform flowering time, because I wanted to time my fungicide right. The VNS ryes, of course, you don't know what you're getting, and so a lot of them will flower at different times. So you'll have 2 or 3 different growth stages in the same field at the same time, and it really screws up spraying. The fungicide timing is critical. You've got like a 5-day window, and if you don't catch that window right, you're wasting your money. So I was going for something that was more consistent. I wanted something that had a very good standability, because I didn't want lodging. I wanted something I could really pour the fertilizer to and get high yield, because again, I'm trying to grow seed for my own use, but also to sell, so I wanted to have as much seed as possible. So a high yielding variety was very important.
To find the oat variety trial and for more information on small grains variety trials from around the Midwest, check out the variety trial section of our small grains page at practicalfarmers.org/smallgrains. Now that you've picked a small grain and a variety and figured out where to plant it, next week we'll talk all things planting.